Out of the dawn.
You're listening to KTNT Radio. Know the naked truth. We will be joined at the top of the hour by Mr. Norman Baker for his evening address.
Born in 1882, Norman Glenwood Baker started life with modest beginnings. He was the last of 10 children to John and Frances Baker of the small town of Muscatine, Iowa. Norman's father was a machinist, so it is no surprise that he and his brothers would find themselves learning their father's trade. By the time Norman reached the 10th grade, he dropped out of school to pursue a career as a machinist. He excelled in this role, but found himself bored. He longed for a future of notoriety and importance. As a child, Norman became fascinated with the circus and the popular vaudeville acts of the day. In 1904, much to the opposition of his mother, Norman left home to begin his career on the vaudeville circuit as a mentalist under the pseudonym Charles Welsh. He would incorporate an assistant into his act that he called Madame Pearl Tangley. Baker chose the name Tangley because he thought it sounded mysterious and interesting. He would use this name for many of his future business endeavors. Baker's run on the vaudeville circuit was overall quite successful. Although he started playing to small crowds, by the end of his run, he was said to have pulled in thousands of spectators, mostly due to the draw of Madame Tangley. Over the course of his show, Norman would learn the power of suggestion, and this would plant the seed of inspiration for what he would later call mental therapeutics, by which a person could cure themselves of any disease by concentrating wholly on them overcoming it without medication or any medical intervention. As a matter of fact, Norman claimed to have cured himself of tuberculosis by imagining the disease being eradicated from his own lungs. After 10 years of performing, Norman returned home to Muscatine. Baker's act as a mentalist showed him the power of his voice and the overwhelming control he could have over the masses who were desperate to believe in things greater than their present circumstance. With a knack for showmanship and a flair for the dramatic, he set his sights on a grander stage. Little did the world know, this would lead him down a path of controversy and cunning, culminating in countless legal battles and the deaths of hundreds of innocent people. Baker used his ambition, machining skills, and his knowledge of traveling shows to develop a new instrument that he called the air calliophone. He created the Tangley Company to sell this new instrument to the masses. It was an incredible success with traveling carnivals, circuses, amusement parks, and vaudeville shows, and Baker claimed it made him over $1 million. Interestingly, this instrument is still manufactured today and can be heard all over the world, with listeners completely unaware of the story of the man who created it. Soon after his success with the air calliophone, Norman would return to his showman roots and create a radio station that he promised would, quote, lift Muscatine from being a little burg lost in the Mississippi cornfields to a city the whole world would know about, end quote. He developed KTNT Radio, which stood for Know the Naked Truth, in 1925 on the highest hilltop in Muscatine along the Mississippi River. Norman said his station was for the common folks of the Iowa farm country. However, he was known to illegally increase his radio wattage in order to reach over 1 million homes in rural communities across the Midwest. Norman used this amplification of his voice to begin constructing a message that the American Medical Association was a corrupt and greedy organization, specifically with their treatments of cancer. Baker would give nightly addresses on KTNT attacking the American Medical Association. and he would often intertwine pro-Hitler, anti-Semitic propaganda into his tirades, all over the background music of his air calliophone. By the late 1920s, Baker began broadcasting wild claims regularly about various medical issues, namely targeting water fluoridation, vaccinations, and the aluminum cookware industry that he claimed were the cause of most cancers. His most incredible claim, however, was that he had discovered ways to cure cancer without surgery or radiation. At a time where cancer was an almost certain death sentence, hopeful and desperate cancer patients began to follow Baker's remedies. In early 1929, Baker heard of the treatments of a supposed cancer doctor in Kansas City named Charles Ozias. Dr. Ozias' cure involved injecting a proprietary serum into his patients to shrink their tumors and cure them of their cancer. Intrigued by this, Baker advertised on KTNT that he was looking for 5 test patients to send to Dr. Ozias to prove that he had discovered the cure for cancer and broadcast it live on the air. When the patients returned, Baker declared to his audience that the treatment had been a success and all of the patients had been cured of their cancer. These test patients, in fact, died of cancer on November 25, 1929, January 7th of 1930, December 28th of 1929, May 3rd of 1930, and February 25th, 1930, respectively. Dr. Ozias did not give Baker his formula for his cancer treatment, but 2 of his employees went to work at the Baker Institute shortly after this test experiment took place. Without a doubt, Baker likely paid these employees for the recipe for Dr. Ozias' cure, which was nothing more than a concoction made up of watermelon seed, brown corn silk, clover leaves, hydrochloric acid, salt, phosphate, water, glycerin, and carbolic acid in various doses. Baker would dub this concoction Formula 5 and sell it as his own. By November of 1929, he established the Baker Muscatine Cancer Institute to sell his new and incredibly expensive miracle cure to the public. He hired local physicians and nurses to try to avoid any legal speculations that he was practicing medicine without a license. He spared no expense in creating a facade of credibility, complete with ornate furnishings and a professional appearance. But behind the polished veneer was a reality far less pristine. His miracle treatments were not only ineffective, but harmful, leaving many patients disillusioned and in a worse condition than before, or even dead. According to the American Medical Association, Norman Baker was making over $75,000 per month with his medical endeavors between 1930 and 1932. The cash was said to be taken out of the hospital in suitcases under the cover of nightfall. This would roughly be about $1.4 million in 2024. Despite mounting complaints and growing skepticism, Baker's charisma continued to shield him for a short time. In 1930, the American Medical Association publicly issued a statement that Norman Baker was a quack doctor, and they discredited any treatment Baker was peddling. Norman sued them for libel and demanded $500,000 in damages. During the trial, Baker would call upon numerous quack doctors to testify, with the court not allowing them to be considered expert witnesses. One of these witnesses claimed to be a doctor at Baker's Institute. The court found that this man had an 8th grade education and worked as a coal miner prior to working for Baker. As can be imagined, the jury in this case found in favor of the American Medical Association. This loss, coupled with the cancellation of KTNT's radio license by the FRC, which was the predecessor to the FCC, and a 1931 Iowa Supreme Court ruling issuing an injunction against Baker for practicing medicine without a license, Norman Baker found himself a showman without an audience. In 1932, after a very short political career where Baker ran for governor of Iowa and lost miserably, he found that he was no longer welcome in his home state. He fled to Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, and opened a new radio station with the call sign XENT. This new station was considered a border blaster, meaning that the radio station would be broadcast across the border to most of the United States while being outside of the regulatory reach of the U.S. federal government. XENT operated with one of the most powerful radio signals in North America, often overpowering other stations in the U.S. Baker would use this new station to attack the AMA, the U.S. federal government, and the Catholic Church, and he would also continue his anti-Semitic rhetoric. He would, of course, also advertise his Formula 5 cure for cancer. This method of making himself into a martyr would prove to be very effective in persuading the public, as many viewed Baker's exile as a way for the AMA and the the federal government to silence him for exposing truths about the medical industry and cancer care in the United States. In 1937, Norman decided to try his hand at opening another cancer hospital in the United States. He set his sights on the dilapidated Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. The Crescent and Eureka Springs were suffering financially due to the Great Depression and the lack of tourists coming to the resort town in the Ozarks. The desperate town welcomed Baker with open arms as they hoped his presence would provide jobs and a renewed interest in Eureka Springs, which had been a destination for healing due to its supposed healing mineral springs since 1879. Norman took over the hotel and revitalized it, repainting parts of the exterior and the interior of the ornate Victorian lobby in his signature lavender color. He welcomed his first patient to newly named Baker Hospital in November of 1937. Within months, thousands of desperate cancer patients flocked to Eureka Springs to find hope. What was waiting for them inside were the same false promises peddled by Baker in Iowa and syringes filled with Formula 5. According to court records, Baker brought in about $500,000 in his first year of operation at the Crescent Hotel. In 2024, this would be around $11 million. History describes the Baker Hospital as a lavish and grand house of horrors. Baker would actively deny the patients in his hospital pain medication, and instead would push his methods of mental therapeutics on them. If a patient questioned why their condition wasn't improving, Norman would simply tell them that they weren't focusing hard enough on getting better. When a patient's cancer would progress to the point of no return, he would have them transferred to an annex building that he had dubbed the Pain Asylum. They would be locked away so that other patients couldn't hear their screams of agony as they would succumb to their illness. According to many, Norman would have deceased patients removed from their rooms late at night so as to not alarm the living. He made a makeshift morgue constructed in the basement of the Crescent, where the bodies were studied and stored until they could be removed. If other patients asked where the deceased went in the morning, Baker and his staff would tell them that they got better and went home. In some cases, Baker would release patients back home while they could still walk. He would lie and tell them that they were cured so they could die in their own home, leaving their family to deal with the bodies so he wouldn't have to. Baker's time in Eureka Springs was filled with just as much controversy and litigation as his time in Iowa. It wasn't long until the law would catch up with him. In 1940, Baker was convicted on 7 counts of mail fraud for using the United States Postal Service to send out fraudulent claims about his cures in order to bring new patients to the Baker Hospital. The court put on the record that his cure was a pure hoax and utterly false. Court records also state that the extent of the Baker Hospital's diagnosis of patients assumed to have cancer involved pinching them and looking them over. The hospital did not even possess a microscope. This means that many of the patients who died in Baker's care likely had other unidentified ailments and may not have even been suffering from cancer at all. Although it is estimated that Norman Baker defrauded cancer patients during the Great Depression out of roughly $4 million through the course of his schemes, this number would be around $89 million in 2024. He was given a relatively light sentence of only 4 years in federal prison and a $4,000 fine. During Baker's incarceration, he would lose the Crescent Hotel and his ex-ENT radio station. After his release, Baker would live out a lavish lifestyle in obscurity aboard a yacht off the coast of Miami, Florida. He died of liver cirrhosis in 1958. Norman Baker's fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. Though his reign of deceit had ended, his story left an indelible mark on history, a stark reminder of the perils of misplaced trust and the dark allure of false hope. It stands as a testament to the lengths some will go for fame and fortune, and the consequences of such ambitious deceit. Thank you for listening to the Phantasmagoria tapes. Sources for this episode can be found in the show notes below. I encourage you to review these articles as they delve so much deeper into the various topics that were covered here today. If you are interested in the Baker Hospital postcard that was presented at the beginning of the episode, head over to www.shopphantasmagoria.com or click the link in the description to grab it before it's gone. While you're there, take a look at the other oddities I have on display. As always, shipping is free on orders over $35. Your purchase helps me to continue my journey of bringing dark and forgotten stories such as this one to life. Until next time, I'm Sean McClure, and these are the Phantasmagoria tapes.